and welcome back to another episode of this Healthy Life podcast. I'm very excited for our guest today. We're going to be speaking with Daniel Firth Griffith, and he is a storyteller, a hunter, and award-winning author known for his work in kincentric rewilding. He founded the Timshel Wildland, a groundbreaking 400-acre rewilding project, and co-founded the Robinia Institute, which promotes kincentric rewilding and relational ecology. So very exciting topics. Daniel, welcome. It'd be great if you can share a little bit about yourself and what got you into all this regenerative agriculture and rewilding work.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Erica, for having me on. It's a blessing to meet you. As I was saying before we started the episode here, I've followed you on social media for a while, and I appreciate your work. And it's an honor to speak with you. And
welcome. So happy to have you on.
Thank you. Absolutely. And that's a big question that you ask. You probably don't see it as such, but I want to answer it as briefly as possible because we have so many good things to talk about.
Absolutely.
But so I mean, I never envisioned a future where I was in agriculture or ecology or anything. I studied mathematics and computer science in college. But even from a younger age, I wasn't raised on a farm. I have no family that was from any sort of farming background. We were all homeschooled. I lived in Northeast Ohio, me and my three other siblings. There was four of us, and my parents, they were part of that generation that decided that homeschooling would be a fun experiment. There wasn't many of us, but they tried their best. And the way they approached it was looking back so interesting, because my mom, she barely graduated from high school, a dear mind and soul, but was never overly educated in any sort of modern way. And so at the beginning of our homeschooling journey, I think she looked at herself and she said, the only things that I can instill into my children are, one, a love for learning, and two, an understanding of how they learn best. And so it was a very free, very autonomous childhood. Not, I think there's a modern movement called unschooling or something like this. We weren't unschooled. My brother is a PhD professor at a university. My sister is a doctor. My other sister is just brilliant. And I guess I'm a farmer. So we all ended up in different ways. We all understood our own
Very
paths.
diverse.
Yeah. But my story changed my senior year in high school. I was a football player and national champion wrestler of sorts, very active. And August 1st, I'll never forget the day. It was a warm-up lap around the football field, and I collapsed. And at the time, they thought it was a hip sprain, which is laughable looking back. The Ohio State medical director, where we were playing, diagnosed me with a severe hip strain or something like this, pelvic tear, just, a muscle injury. And within a period of about 3 or 4 months, we came to learn that and was diagnosed with a pretty severe degenerative genetic disease, where all four of my ball and joint limbs, my two hips and my two shoulders, they were born wrong, basically. And no matter what we would do to resolve them as issues, because as you can imagine, if you have a ball and you have a socket and they're grinding against each other as they shouldn't be, your labrums, your rotator cuffs, all of the nerves, your entire lymphatic system really sits in, is generated in your hips. And so all of those things are being destroyed. And no matter what we could do to fix the issue arthroscopically or totally reshaping the way my hip is placed by doing some more extensive things, they would continually grow back. And so we had years and years of surgeries and severe depression and autoimmune conditions. And I went through periods where I didn't go to the bathroom. I didn't have a bowel movement for 2 months. And just really interesting things. I lost the ability to walk for a year, spent 2 years relearning how to walk. Some of the surgeries went very, very bad. My entire lymphatic system was destroyed. About 4 or 5 years of surgeries and pain. And I tell this story, and I write the whole story in the book that I just published. So if anybody's interested more in that, they can read it there. I won't bore us with the details. But at the end of all of this, I weighed 135 pounds, and I was sitting at the back of the back porch of our childhood home. I was married to my wife by this point. She was off at work. I was reading a book. It's about all the energy that I had. The latest condition of my health journey, I just broke out in sores all over my body. When I would move, they would break open, and it was pretty serious. So I was just sitting there enjoying spring. I had a little fire in a chimney next to me, trying my best to enjoy spring, reading a book. But a friend of mine who was a local farmer who had known my whole life had given me Joel Salatin's book called Folks, This Ain't Normal. And it's a book, as you can imagine, about modern life not being normal and how our disconnection from the food system, from the life, our relations around us is not normal. Folks, this ain't normal. And I remember reading it and I thought to myself, like, man, like I'm not normal, that I don't feel comfortable. I'm not in, the journey that I thought I was supposed to be walking in. And I'll never forget, my mom walked out of the back of the house, a sliding glass door, and she looked at me, and she'd been with us the whole time. She traveled the country with us, lived in hospitals with us. I mean, she was truly there the whole time. So was my father. But she walked out of the back door, so I focused on her. And she said, and this is crazy, she said, Daniel, we've tried everything, but the only thing we haven't tried is chickens. And I laughed, she laughed, we might have cried a little bit. And but what she meant was we had been passively searching for health this whole time. And I don't mean to say that. I mean, we went Eastern medicine, Western medicine, acupuncture, surgery, and everything in between. Going to a doctor is not negative, is not bad in any way. I mean, I can't tell you the number of doctors I owe my life to, both Eastern and Western worldviews alike. But to truly be healthy, right? It's not to search for health, but to become it. That's what she was saying. And in that moment, the way we understood this becoming was in starting to grow our own foods, basically to have connection back to our foods. So that same day, we bought 100 chickens. We didn't know what we were doing. We didn't understand regenerative agriculture, didn't even know there was a thing. We just thought we were buying chickens. We started researching. We found different regenerative practices where you can grow chickens to be nutrient rich and heal the soil at the same time, a new concept to us. And as I say, we started to buy local foods because we found local foods to be richer in nutrients, fresher, et cetera. We saw that my body was actually rehabilitating on these local foods. We started cutting out, all of the foods that I would imagine your listeners know and know well, processed foods, high fructose corn syrup, sugars, et cetera. We cut all those out, started to eat raw whole foods. And then we started to fall in love with the local farmers and hands producing those foods. And then we started helping those farmers. And then we started to realize that we wanted to be farmers, and health returned slowly. And now 12 years later from that moment, my wife and I, we live in Virginia on 400 acres, farm full time. I am in wonderful health, still have some problems, but wonderful health, nothing to complain of. And yeah, that's really how this journey began.
Wow, what a journey. And it's like, sometimes we think of food as like the last resort or the last medicine, right? We're like, food's something that we put in our bodies every day, and it really is healing. It really is medicine. And if you're not giving your body the nutrient dense things that it needs, it can't heal. So yeah, just such a beautiful story. And like, it's just, when you go back in hindsight's 2020, you're like, all I had to do was change some of my diet and it could have helped me so much sooner. So
right.
Yeah, absolutely. And even in my own journey, diet has been just such a game changer. And I can tell if I like veer off my diet a little bit, I don't feel as good or I start to get inflammation. But, when I eat clean, when I eat nutrient dense foods, that's when I feel the best. And
right.
I was a vegetarian for like 10 years and I was slowly killing myself and I thought I was being healthy. Little did I know that it's not a healthy diet at all. And my body did not like it. And once I shifted more to like, using regenerative farming meats and, grass-fed meats and organic foods and things like that, and really sticking to whole foods, my health just also improved so much dramatically. So yeah. I'm very happy to hear that helped you as well.
Yeah. No, that's wonderful. That's wonderful. I know many stories like your own. I think when we, especially us modern humans who have been educated so well to think reductionistly or linearly, to see the world around us as complicated, not entirely complex. So we miss the nuance. I think when we're trying to find health, we see it as a particular thing that we search for, right? In order to be healthy, I need to do this one thing. In order to be healthy, I need to go on this one journey. But health is balance, right? That's what participation, it's attention. I heard recently on a podcast that attention is a moral act. It's a moral attitude, paying attention to something. I think health, in order to be truly there, to be present, it's not to find that one thing that will make us healthy, because that doesn't exist. The world is way too complex, way too nuanced for one thing to cause any sort of true balance to occur, right? It's a co-creation of life's energies. And, I think that's what we really learned when we started to participate in the world around us, that simply changing your diet in a singular way, maybe for you that was vegetarian to more omnivorous, that's a step, right? That's a moment in our journey that we go through, and maybe that's right. It was obviously right for you. Maybe it's right for someone else. But starting to eat locally, more regenerative foods that are in symphony and harmony with their surroundings, with happy people. Like I tell the story that's power. But I tell the story all the time. I tell it in the book as well. There's an organization in Massachusetts called the Biological Food Association. I don't know if you know of their work, but if you're listening to this, you have any interest, their work is truly remarkable. I'll say two things about them, and then there's this impact that I'll get to in a second that changed my life. But they raised $12 million recently to open source develop what's called a nutrient spectrometer, which is a handheld device that can basically measure the levels of primary and secondary compounds in foods so that it can empower a consumer to walk to a farmer's market, scan a carrot, right? And the machine will tell you this has 51% of the, beta carotene that it should, or whatever it is, calcium that it should, right? And so now you can make the best educated decision for your own health, given the nutrient availability or the nutrient presence, I should say, because there's some nuance there between these two terms, bioavailability and presence. But you can make that decision. Well, the interesting thing is they've also done the largest nutrient-dense beef study ever conducted. They're working with a scientist out of Norway, I believe, who's now a resident at the University of Utah State, I believe. Stefan von Villet is his name, but they've surveyed, I think at this point, over 2,000 different regenerative farms' meat, and they combine that data, grass-fed and finished meat, regenerative meat. They combine that data with soil samples from the farm, manure samples from the farm, a biological assay of the vegetation at the farm, so they know what forages these animals have been eating, and so many other components. And they're putting it together, synthesizing it, trying to determine what makes nutrient-dense beef. So you have nutrient-rich soil producing nutrient-rich forages that combine with a cow's rumen function and everything else into nutrient-dense beef. And they're trying to answer that question. And so anyways, their executive director, their founder, a gentleman named Dan Kittredge, wonderful human being. I was in a conversation with him, a webinar a couple of years ago, and I asked him, I said, Dan, you just spent $12 million building a nutrient spectrometer. Nutrients matter. You are conducting the world's largest nutrient-dense beef study that is universally acclaimed as the study when it comes down to nutrient-dense beef. I have one question for you. What is more important, nutrient-dense beef or happy cows? Which one matters more to you and your understanding of human health as the consumer? He did not hesitate. He leans forward as I lean forward now, if you're watching this on video. And he says, Daniel, happy cows. That's what matters. Right. And that's the nuance that I think gets lost when we progress into this regenerative food movement. And we're talking about soil health and biodiversity and carbon sequestration and everything else, phytochemicals, secondary compounds, nutrient dense food. However you come at this, better food movement, all of those are options. All wonderful, all fine, but we have to allow the nuance to speak, our relations around us to speak, because the happiness of cows, I mean, there's an entire 100-page section in my book dedicated to the idea of happiness in cows, why that matters to humanity. But if that matters, right, the humans raising the animals, their happiness matters. The animal's happiness matters. The grass's happiness matters. And all of a sudden we have this crescendo, this symphony of life working together in harmony for us to enjoy. That's health, right? Not just grass-fed and finished beef, right? And all of this is possible when we do start to pay attention and participate, which is hard. And I guess I might be rambling a bit, but the modern consumer, we've been active farm for about 10 years now, raising local food for local families, farmers markets, etc. And so we get to work with and see and converse with and have community with a lot of local eaters, and it's very easy for modern humans to fall into this trap of just consuming. All I have to do for health is just consume better food, right? That would be, saying that all, I have to do to be stronger and nothing else, right, is to just lift more weights or bench press more. Right, as if that one function defines strength. Like, no, what if I meant emotional strength, psychological strength, spiritual strength, relational? There's so many more aspects to strength than bench press. Right. And so allowing that nuance to speak and paying attention to it really allows us to actualize health in our own lives and our own bodies, with the lives around us, our relations, etc. And so that really is what that story pushed us into. I mean, it wasn't voluntary. I mean, we fell headlong into the thing of participation. We learned a lot. We failed a lot. but it brought us to where we are.
Awesome. And yeah, so I want to hear more about your project. So it's called the Timshel Wildland. And so it's a 400-acre project. You said you mentioned that you sell products in the farmers markets and things like that. What kind of things do you raise there? And tell us a little bit about the project and what the farm is all about.
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. Again, like my story, bigger. So please don't feel that it is negative to interrupt me. Just interrupt me, stop me in my flow, and redirect me. You won't harm my feelings whatsoever. Yeah, so our farm here, if you will, began about a decade ago. It was a land that was being clear cut. It's a land that we could afford, and it was about 1/3 of property value. We closed in a week, stopped a lot of the clear cutting from happening. Clear cutting, for those who might not know, is just the total deforestation of a forest. So all the trees go, no select cutting, no reservation, just everything goes, a fire sale kind of thing, and very destructive to the local ecology. Let's just put it that way. And but it made it financially viable for us to come in, and so 400 acres was about twice that what we can pay for land, and so it was what it was. But what it did was it presented us a very strange playground. Because when you're thinking about grass-fed and finished animals, I'm seeing a waving field of cool and warm season grasses. I see cows, in a very treeless, linear type meadow. It's just very simple. It's kind of like, my family's from Ireland. I see an Irish meadow, contained in 4 wonderful stone walls. That was not what we had. I mean, we had an oil-burned, rutted, deep eroding landscape, some fields on the side that hadn't seen so much activity from the engines and machines and such. And so we had a little bit of grass to play with. And so we knew from the beginning that how we approach this landscape couldn't be in the traditional manner. We couldn't just buy some cows, place them, start rotating them, and call it good. That forced us to see life in a particular way. As this landscape developed, I hate to keep referencing to the book I just wrote. The book I just wrote, to be very clear, chronicles this transition. So from us as a regenerative farm, over the course of about 7 years, into what we call a concentric rewilding landscape, which we'll get into that definition here in a moment. But what we learned is, in this whole regenerative agriculture and climate crisis, save the world type movement, right, where we believe that it's not the cow, it's the how. It's a phrase that gets passed around in our little groups here. We quickly learned that humans are not good cows, but all humans do is tell cows what to do. And so we started to realize that as we started to lose that control, as we started to give really the voice back to the cattle, right, or the voice back to the birds, the voice back to the goats or the horses or whatever it was, that slowly we could reawaken our own understanding of what it meant to be human, what it meant to be a cow, and all of the tendencies that we talk about in agriculture. One of these tendencies is overgrazing. When an animal, put my ecological hat on real quick, my biological hat, if you will. Overgrazing is when a herbivore, so something that eats grass, consumes a plant, and then it starts to regrow. And as it starts to regrow, it gets consumed again. That is overgrazing. The reason this matters is when you're driving around a rural landscape, you could be from a rural landscape, you could be from a city, vacationing or holidaying in the most rural landscape to the city that you're located in, and you're driving around, look to, out your window, look to the pastures around you. There might not be a lot of cows, but the grass is going to be short. The grass is not short because the cows just consumed it. The grass is going to be short because it has no energy to regrow. Overgrazing is a product of regrowth or an outcome of regrowth. And so when a plant undergoes a regrowth, just like a human, right? We do a particular workout, we strain our body, we tear our muscles, whatever it is, the microscopic tears that are going to recover and grow back stronger. The same thing that's happening inside of us is happening in a grassland, but it has to have the energy in its own body, just like you and I have energy, a plant has energy, and it needs to recover using that crown energy, that root energy. Well, the problem is only when that plant is fully recovered does that crown or root energy replenish itself. So imagine you go run a marathon, tomorrow you go run a marathon, the next day you go run a marathon. At a certain point, you're going to collapse and die.
Yep.
Hopefully you collapse before you die and you can stop, but
Yes.
sooner or later you're going to collapse.
Yeah,
That
it's
is
not
the convention.
sustainable.
Exactly. That is the conventional cattle or grazing landscape. The cows come in, they graze it, it starts to recover because it has crown energy. but then it gets grazed again, and it can never photosynthesize enough to bring energy back to its roots to restore its crown energy. And so every time it's grazed, it's losing that crown energy. Think your
Mm-hmm.
savings account. You're spending, you're never bringing in.
Mm-hmm.
At a
Mm-hmm.
certain point, it doesn't have enough energy to regrow, to recover. That is when a plant has been overgrazed. That plant will never grow again. So when you're driving around the landscape and you see really short grass in a conventional field, right, it's not short because it was grazed, it's short because it's done. Right? It's an animal or a species, a life form that has run too many marathons and never was allowed to recover.
Yep.
And so when we say it's not the cow, it's the how, when we think about regenerative agriculture and that it's how we manage this livestock all around us that can create a regenerative or degenerative system, what we're saying is that we can place an animal here, they can graze it, and then we can move them and let it recover. What we realized is that's not the only way to get the job done. And we quickly learned that through matriarchal lineages, so basically, if we could keep family lines intact within our herds, mothers with their daughters, with their daughters, with their daughters' daughters, and we can create that sort of herd bond via these matriarchal lineages, these adaptive landscape genomics is a phrase we use in the book. Genomics that adapt to its landscape over lineage time, that is to say, within families, that all of this life would follow the matriarch, the lead cow, if you will. And she is always moving because she needs a lot of energy to continue doing what she is doing. So she's always seeking for that new growth, which is in front of her. And so as long as we fostered that, we realized that they rotationally grazed on their own. We didn't have to be out there moving these animals every day and telling them what to eat. They knew what to eat slowly. It reawakened inside of them. Or for another way of looking at it, as we talk about in the book, this landscape, adaptive landscape genomics really processes in utero. So for mammals, the 9 months spent in gestation, these calves growing in their mother's tummy, those 9 months have more an effect on the epigenetic and phenotypic realities of that animal's ability to adapt to its landscape than the rest of its life combined. Right. And so as these families were developing, the mothers in utero were teaching their young what to graze, how to move, what plants are nutritious, what plants are not nutritious. And not only did they start to rotationally graze on their own, but they stopped requiring off-farm inputs, so minerals, right? So when a cow might need phosphorus, right, a farmer like myself would give the cow phosphorus, right? So we as the farmer have to be nutritionists, we have to be veterinarians, we have to be these things for these animals because they don't know how to eat phosphorus in a landscape. But we started to realize that when these families maintained their contact with each other, so we stopped weaning, we never took calves away from the moms, we stopped castrating, so all the boys born were boys and their endocrine systems were working as they desired them to work. We stopped pulling bulls and boys out of the herd. So now we just went run herd, where it's always just co-creating and developing and self-organizing, which really fosters a system into overdrive. They also started to learn how to self-medicate prophylactically or also during the incoming of a lack of health. So for instance, if they experience a lack of phosphorus in their diet, they would go out and they would find pigweed or spiny amaranth, it's called, a plant that fixes phosphorus in the soil. What a lot of non-agricultural people do not understand is that weeds are nutrient fixers. In ecology, we call weeds forbs, basically, forbs. But when these weeds or forbs come into the system, what they're doing is they're coming in to mine a particular nutrient, right, or accentuate a particular nutrient, and then share that nutrient with their surroundings. And so, exactly. And so for an animal, let's say a cow, let's say it's Nellie in the herd, one of our matriarchs, this beautiful black horned cow. She's an Irish Dexter, wonderful animal, born here on the farm, love of our lives, this Nellie and Nancy. There's two of them. They go by the same ends. It's how we keep track of everybody. If they can go out to the landscape and find pigweed or spiny amaranth, right, and self-medicate the phosphorus that they need, we don't have to do anything. And as long as we don't have to do anything, they can self-medicate to the desired outcome, right? Imagine you go to the hospital, but you can't talk to the doctor, right? And let's say you have a phosphorus deficiency that's wrecking your body in a particular way, causing a lack of health or imbalance. And the doctor is looking at you and he's like, well, I don't really know what's going on, but you can't talk back. This is the relationship between a cow and a human. We don't share the same language. And as long as you don't share the same language, it's very hard to tell the cow what to eat, as if I'm supposed to know what it's feeling. And so as these families developed, we started to realize that not only are we doing less work moving them, not only are we growing more grass that is regenerating the landscape, sequestering carbon, building in biodiversity, growing soil health, etc., balancing the mineral profiles of the plants because they're actually cycling the nutrients for us and we're not helping them cycle. They started to self-medicate, and now we have lesser input costs. So now the unintended reality of letting go of our control to some degree was we can raise the best meat on the planet as we see it. So this is 100% grass-born, grass-fed, grass-finished. This is absolutely zero off-farm input, no minerals, no alfalfa, no soybean meal to get them through a dry season. They know what they need and they know where it is, and they have the freedom to go get it because they're not contained within a particular quarter acre of fencing today, right? Because if they're going to, well, you get the point. In rotational grazing, we're going to have to keep moving them. And so at a certain point, they're only able to eat what I give them for the day because that's all the space they have.
Yep.
So if what they need is outside of that fence, we have to give it to them. And so now that they are able to rotationally graze on their own, they can self-select what they need in the balance that they need it. We don't have to provide it. And now we can basically provide really cost accessible, price accessible, grass-fed and finished beef, to our local community where we live in the middle of nowhere, Central Virginia. The families struggle to pay much more than about $4 to $6 a pound for beef. And so one early mission of ours, while we need money, we don't have a large savings account or nest egg, right? We also can't charge a lot of money for a product that we say everybody needs. That's another huge, in my opinion, or our opinion, our personal worldview issue with a lot of the health food that is on the market today, in the sense that, you have to eat better, but it's going to cost you $12 a pound.
Right. And it costs more to eat food that's natural and organic than it does
Exactly.
to, buy chemical laden or pesticide laden food, which always blows my mind as well.
Exactly. And so releasing that control, letting the animals be in their own way autonomous, right? And rewilding with them, because we've had to learn a lot, right? We always say that our project is really learning to run with them, right? We have to rewild ourselves, learn what it really means to be human in the modern world, while they're relearning what it means to be a bovine in the modern world. And as we grow together, and as they say, as the waves lift all boats in the ocean, right? What we arrive at is an exemplary product at a very cost accessible price, or local accessible price. And then a lot of time to do things like this. I mean, we spend a lot of time writing. I speak all over the world. We teach courses, etc. Before I move on, I'll say two other things real quick. I speak about cattle because they're easy. We can all picture cattle. We also raise goats, sheep, some awesome free-range chickens that require no off-farm input too. That's a whole other thing. They fly and nest in the trees and such.
Wow,
And then we also breed draft horses. And so my wife and I, during the winter season, because we have very little to do at this point, we regeneratively manage forests, and then we hand hew log homes for people. So we build houses out of axes and draw shaves and stuff. And so we do we breed draft horses to help with that process, basically to demechanize and deindustrialize the whole home building process with horses and axes, not tractors and scissor lifts and everything else. And then
awesome.
The other thing I'll mention, when we first moved onto the landscape, and this is really, I think it's a point of inspiration for people. And so I provide it because, some of the things that I write about, sometimes they don't feel inspirational. So I try to find the inspiration and the hope, because it's there. But when you're participating in the thing, sometimes you get a little bit lost. But when we moved here, there was 5 vegetative species in the pasture. So grasses, let's just call them grasses, legumes, forbs, and things, vegetation in the pastures. There was 5 different species. 2 years ago, maybe a year and a half ago, we performed the same biological assay. So people go into the field and they just find and identify every vegetative plant possible. They're on their hands and knees. We did that in the beginning. There was 5. Then about a year and a half ago, 2 years, we did it again, and there was 173. We didn't plant any of these species. We didn't cast any of these species. This is just natural emergence of a system that's living. And so the really wonderful thing about a system that has found health, right? It's not that we've searched for health, but in some sense, health found us when we let go of control and all of these other elements, is that life returns in exemplary abundance. right? And the wonderful thing about biodiversity, because I think we hear it a lot. Like if you've participated in the climate narrative today, you know one of two things. You either know that we need to sequester carbon, or you know, and maybe you know both, or you know
Mm-hmm.
that we need to increase biodiversity. Biodiversity is, you know, one of the factors that we need to look at. I mean, every day about 150 species go extinct in our world. 96% of all mammals alive today in mass, as a mass measurement, are either humans or domesticated livestock. 96%, right? So this is a huge moment in humanity, a huge question. What are we going to do? And the really wonderful thing about biodiversity is when you're not pushing it forward, right? You're not controlling it, and when you're not controlling it, you're not separating yourself from it. And so when you alleviate that control, just like we alleviated the control between us and the herds of animals, when you alleviate your control over the biodiversity, what happens is something so much infinitely beyond your own ability to establish, if that makes sense. Like, for instance, if I was going to increase biodiversity and I were to control its increase, I would plant, 15, 20 species out there. And I would be like, that's the most I could possibly do, right? Like if I no-till drilled these in or cast them, that's a lot, to increase in such a way. But in a period of less than a decade, to go from 5 to 173, and maybe 20 of those species haven't been seen in this region for a long time, maybe 15 to 20, I couldn't tell you exactly, right? You can't even buy the seeds for these plants, right? But they're emerging from the soil. A grass seed, for instance, can live in a soil profile for 1 to 2,000
Mm.
years, waiting
So
for
it's
its moment,
starting to
waiting.
come back to life.
Exactly. And so it's a
Yeah.
reawakening of life's wildness, not a definition of wildness as a thing that's over there. Because a lot of that, the rewilding or conservation land ethics really see the wild as such. They see the wild as something, you know, over there beyond that hill, inside of this, game fence of exclusion, where we take humanity out, we take the livestock out and all of that. Well, if life is complex and if life is nuanced, right, excluding life is not a way to, quote unquote, find the wild. In the book, we say that wildness is the autonomous acceptance of the basic conditions as they are. It's the autonomous acceptance of the basic conditions as they are. And viewed as such, we felt like, again, in writing the book and even in discussing over the last maybe 5 or 6 years as we've been playing with this idea more officially, more in a developed manner, this idea of kincentric rewilding, that we have to grow into a new state of the wild, which is an old state. Let's not lose that nuance. It is an old state, but it feels new to us who are separated from Earth in the modern, civilized, industrial sense. But it's kincentric, meaning that it's kinship meets concentricity. So concentric circles of life and death. You have this idea there. You have fractals there, but inside of these fractals and around this concentric circle, you have kinship. That to control life is to some degree to reduce it. And as we reduce it, it becomes a life not at all. And so in order to have life, going back to our original conversation, in order to have health, right, we can't go trying to find it as one particular moment, right? You have to become it. You have to participate. You have to give attention to the thing. Attention is a
Be a
moral
part of
act.
it.
You have to
Mm-hmm.
participate. You have to become. That's exactly
Yeah.
right.
Absolutely. So I have a question that's a little controversial for you, and I want to
Please.
get your take on this. So, there's a big argument that says going vegan is better for the environment. It's better, obviously for the animals because you're not killing the animals, even though I think there is a lot of death of animals in the fields and agriculture in general. But, there's also the whole other school of thought that no, well, if you actually do regenerative farming and eat, animals that have been sustainably raised and you're replenishing the soil and helping the environment, very similar to what you're doing there. What's your take on, the vegan school of we're better for the environment versus regenerative agriculture, and where's a kind of common ground between those two?
Yeah. A wonderful, wonderful question. I hope I answer it.
It's a constant battle that I hear,
Yes.
people having. So I want to get your take on it, especially since you're on the farming side. And I truly believe that regenerative farming is the way to go. And that's going to be more sustainable for the environment and for our health and for humans and for everything involved. But I want to hear what you've got to say about this one.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I love answering, and I hope I get to it. If I start to ramble, pull me back on track. First and foremost, what I say to people who ask this question is, I think if you were to sit me down with these binary beliefs, these binary worldviews, and you told me that I was supposed to sit either closer to the vegetarian or vegan or closer to the standard American diet consuming individual, I would sit with the vegans and the vegetarians. We agree on more than can possibly be iterated here or well
Mm-hmm.
described here.
Mm-hmm.
The belief that all life matters, for instance, is a fine point of community, right? That communion, that is the transformation of life around us into the life within us as it becomes us, let's say that's communion, matters, right? And it's not an inanimate relationship that we have between us as animate human, right? And this world around us that's inanimate. And so first and foremost, I would sit with the vegans and the vegetarians. So let that be known and clear. The way I'll answer the question is, our local indigenous people who call themselves the Monacans, the Saponi, the Occaneechi, the Monacans, the Manahoacs, all part of the Siouan Indian nation. The Monacan, when they describe their language, which I really want to draw attention to here, Monacan as a term, it doesn't describe, where they are or, anything about their culture or anything. It literally means earth people. Earth people. Translates directly as earth people. In the book, I write that really no health, ecological or social, can ever inhabit this place that we call earth until we realize that we are earthlings, that we are made out of clay, we are earth. Let's say we don't have relationship, we are the relationship. We don't harmonize with earth, we are the harmony. We are earth, right? And so number one, looking at this from an indigenous worldview, the Monacans calling themselves the earth people, I think primarily we have to reorient, re-recognize our place in this orb of, ever-changing impermanence that we call earth, which is we are earth. Right. And so to me, earth doesn't look over, right? When a cow is in a field and looks at a spider, spinning its web under the morning dew here in this pasture beyond my little writing shed that I'm in, the cow doesn't look at the spider and it doesn't seem to me, I could be wrong, but it doesn't seem to me to be like, damn it, if you would just be a better spider, or maybe if you stopped killing all of those flies, I'd like you more, or something like this, right? If wildness is the autonomous acceptance of the basic conditions as they are, right, it's us understanding that we are the basic conditions as we are, as they are, as all of us are, right? And so classification of life is a modern, uncreative scientific approach to the relations and the life around us. It doesn't seem that the spider classifies its work as opposed to the cow's work. They are both, quote unquote, regenerating or healing their landscape for their own selves. Right? A cow may regenerate a grassland when it takes a bite of the grass in two ways. The first of which is or three ways, really. The first of which is it takes that vegetation, digests it, ferments it with wonderful bacteria, poops it out the back end as biologically fermented, marvelous green goop that happens to look a little black, right? And that's organic material, right? That's one way. Another way is a cow's saliva has an enzyme that after biting a blade of grass will actually chemically cue that grass, tell that grass to regrow. So it's an enzyme that stimulates grass growth, right? That's another way they regenerate. The third way they regenerate is as they consume these blades of grass, it causes the roots of that plant to slough off, as they say, to be cut off, and it turns into wonderful soil organic matter to be decayed and consumed in the rhizosphere by bacteria, fungi, nematodes, protozoa, and so much more. The beautiful thing about this is the nematodes are the last moment in this soil food web process. And everything they eat, which is everything that everybody else has eaten, and they eat everyone else, they poop it out, to use the phrase very colloquially, as plant available nutrients, right? So what the cow is doing is it's turning life through death into plant available nutrients for another plant to regrow. So the death of the one plant is the life of bacteria, which is the death of bacteria when the nematodes consume it, which is the life via the plant available nutrients that nematode is excreted for another plant, right? So not only does life not categorize everything, life really to some large degree co-creates this beautiful reality through the process of death, life, new birth, chaos, etc. And so that story, to me, humans are the only ones that bifurcate and linearize that story between plants and animals. So when I say in the beginning that it's the vegans and the vegetarians that I believe and agree with, like there's a story in the book about a field harvest and of one of our cows, a bull named Lionel. And I was recording the audiobook. And in the middle of reading this story, I was completely in tears. And the editor of the audiobook kept it in. And I'm stumbling over words. I'm completely in tears. The emotion that a true participant in life, somebody or something, some living force, whether or not it's a human or a cow or a tree that's right outside, there's a black locust tree kind of growing into my window here. As soon as we realize our connection, our kincentric connection to the life around us, we can but celebrate and mourn and have great joy and great grief when the process of life and death undergoes all around us. So it's not to neglect that, right? But rather to honor that, which I think vegans and vegetarians do so well from an ethical or spiritual perspective, a mental perspective. When it comes down to what a body needs, to truly function well, this is where I take a step back. I'm not a nutritionist. I don't understand what a body needs. Everything that I've learned about nutrition, everything that I've studied in my own personal journey, and everything that I understand from an agricultural or ecological perspective about nutrition is that I will tell you there's a plant in our landscape. It's called poison hemlock. If you as a human, Erica, were to walk up to it, break it, it's everywhere too. If you were to break it, it would ooze a liquid that if you touch that liquid to your mouth, you would definitely be hospitalized. And I've known people who died from it. It's very poisonous. Same thing goes for cows, goats, sheep, horses are the same way. I have seen certain cows walk up to that plant, break it, and drink the juice. And I have seen certain cows do that and they died, right? So what is poisonous to the cow is not a conversation I'm willing to have. What is poisonous to this cow is a conversation I'm willing to have. Life is so nuanced, right? That to make some blanket statement that everybody should be vegan or everybody should be omnivorous or everyone should be a carnivore, to me, misses the point, right? What food in our surroundings is speaking to us and what food in our surroundings should we abstain from? In the book, this is just, to me, this changes everything. In terms of human nutrition, but it has yet to catch on. Right now, it's only a hypothesis. But in the book, there's a chapter titled Interlinkages, which is really trying to study the interspecial and intergenerational linkages of chemicals. Okay, so we all agree that if I feed glyphosate or Roundup to a cow, it's an herbicide, it's a pesticide technically, but it's generally a broad spectrum herbicide. It kills weeds, but it's classified as a pesticide. If I were to feed Roundup or glyphosate to a cow and then you consume the cow the next day, you are inheriting, or you drink the milk, mammary glands are included here. You drink that milk, you eat that animal, you will inherit glyphosate. So chemicals, we know, and everybody agrees with this, whether or not you agree glyphosate is bad or good, doesn't matter. But the point is, it is linking you to the pallets of your food. So what your food ate matters. We know this. Everybody knows this. Now, whether or not we can all find adherence and agreement to what matters is different, but we all agree that what your food eats matters, which is why we eat grass-fed and finished beef as opposed to soy-fed and soy-finished beef, unless you think soy is wonderful and then you do that. But the point is we all agree. The interesting thing is, as Dan Kittredge said, as the Biological Food Association has argued, as the book and all of the different, I bet it pulls from about 30 different scientific papers to build to this moment. All of these scientists are also saying that how your food feels matters, right? So glyphosate is a chemical, but cortisol is a chemical. It's a different chemical, but it's still a chemical. And so if an animal has increased cortisol when it is processed, let's say, or right before it's processed, right before you consume it, do you inherit that increased cortisol? All of the science is leading to a very fine and firm yes. Right. So Rachel Bowers is a scientist in 2009. I think she's out of Mount Sinai, but she proved the intergenerational linkages of stress and cortisol function or adrenal function between Holocaust survivors and their offspring. And to save a lot of the details, what she proved or really demonstrated is that trauma can be passed in generations. And so if a woman were to undergo a traumatic, let's say she was at Auschwitz, okay, and she went a lot of trauma, of course, and she developed a PTSD response, so an improper adrenal functioning and cortisol imbalance because of that trauma, of course. And then 20 years later, as Bowers proved in 2009, were to have a child, that child would inherit a PTSD response to trauma it never had. So let's say, what caused or spiked the PTSD response in the mother, that same physical reality could gather around her children, and they would have the same PTSD response without ever having been at Auschwitz.
Having had the experience.
Having the experience. And now it's different with males because of mtDNA, mitochondrial DNA, and regular DNA. But if a father like myself, if I was at Auschwitz and then 20 years later procreated and had a child, that child wouldn't have the PTSD, the outcome. They would have the adrenal processing. So they would be less able to correctly balance and process their own adrenal system and cortisol levels in their blood and other things. And so that they would have a problem with that and be more predisposed to PTSD. So Bowers proved that it's intergenerational between, the same species. What this book and a lot of our research here at the Timshel Wildland project, or the Wildland as we lovingly call it, is looking at, can this same reality, this same landscape-induced trauma extend between your palates and the place that it was raised? So can a stressed cow deliver stress? Can a diabetic cow deliver diabetes to the human? And there's this one moment, and I'll let you read the book. It's about 100 pages, this section. There's a lot of details, and I convey it as non-scientifically as possible. And it seems like I did it decently because the reviews are not negative in this way. But it concludes with this hypothesis. It's called the xenohormesis hypothesis. And the xenohormesis hypothesis states, or really questions, that plants, and really all life, but we're studying plants. It was developed and started to be researched at wineries because grapes during certain conditions produce certain things that cause them to study it. But they're non-nutritive packets of information that is passed to the consumer that have nothing to do with nutrients. It has nothing to do with phytochemicals. It has nothing to do with amino acids or enzymes or proteins or calories or fibers or anything else. It's non-nutritive communication packets that literally will indicate or signal to its host, the consumer, you. So let's say you walk out your house. Let's say there's some yellow wood sorrel growing outside of your house, a fine wild forage plant. Kind of tastes like yellow starbursts. If you can put your mind 30 years back, if you ever had yellow starbursts, it tastes wonderful. But that plant is continuously adapting to its local place, right? At the end of the day, you go inside of our air conditioning houses, we put on clothes. We're doing a lot of things to separate ourselves from our place. And that's not a bad thing. But yellow wood sorrel growing outside of this building here doesn't get to separate itself from its place. And so it's always reading the air, surveying the water, analyzing and assaying its environment, and it sees the chemical cues, it sees these things. And what it's doing via the xenohormesis hypothesis is it's integrating all of its stress response and adaptive landscape genomic response and phenotypic response and its phenotypic plasticity and everything else into a packet. And when you eat it, that packet is given to you via this hypothesis. It's not been proven enough to be a scientific reality yet, but it's really interesting. Interesting to read it and study it because it's everything but that, right? It's like you ran a marathon, you have 2 steps left. We just have to complete the marathon. And what it can do to the human body is so interesting. So when I'm talking about vegan, vegetarian, carnivore, omnivore, it's that what I don't want to do is reduce the life around us, which we might call food in this moment, into an inanimate object that provides us a nutrient. Because what it's doing is obviously so much more than that. And according to the xenohormesis hypothesis, it might be signaling to your body that winter is coming. And so what happens, or that the air is impure, right? And you start to actually develop, a nasal or sinus, not infection. I was going to say infection. That's so improper. Reductions and more, snot or boogers, whatever they're called, to restrict the airflow. Like your body is going to go through an adaptive response based upon the food you eat and the chemical signals, these non-nutritive packets, based upon what the plant is telling you. So for instance,
and based on your environment and like what's going on around you, right? Like so much of that impacts everything that we're doing, everything we're putting in our mouths, and
so when we eat food out of season. Yeah, exactly. And so when we eat food out of season, right? So let's pretend you're eating, asparagus in the winter season. Well, asparagus is a spring plant, right? Asparagus grows during the cool season. But if you're eating it in the wintertime, it might have grown in the autumn, let's say, or it might have grown in a hoop house, right? And so it's growing via these false pressures. And it's saying, hey, winter's not coming. I'm growing in a hoop house. Or let's say spring isn't coming, right? So that's better because it's a constant cool temperature in the greenhouse because it's in the wintertime. Asparagus is expecting spring to transition into summer, but it's not. And so it creates a chemical or a non-nutritive chemical packet that is delivered to you, Erica, when you eat it. And it literally tells your body, don't start losing weight. Don't decrease your metabolism or increase your metabolism because the summer is not coming, but it's winter
That's so
time.
sad.
Exactly. And so your body is undergoing an adaptive landscape response to a
Yep.
landscape and climate that doesn't exist. And
Yep.
so in my opinion, what I would rather do, right, is one, let's all acknowledge the animacy and the life all around us, right? And when you eat a plant, when you eat a cow, to me, you thank it, right? And when you start to view it from this perspective, when you start to view the life around you as relations, not resources, that is to say, number one, your life's changed, but number two, your palate's change, and what you eat and how you eat changes. But also, we have to start visioning the landscape as this autonomous, co-creative feedback loop of communication, where all of the relations on Earth, as Earthlings, are communicating with each other how to survive. Because the Earth is constantly changing. I don't care if it's modern climate change, anthropocentric climate change, it's glaciation, etc. Earth is always changing. And as long as Earth is changing, we have to undergo a constant adaptive response. And our plates are connecting us to our places, via this xenohermesis hypothesis, via the relationship, via becoming and participation and everything else. That is a conversation I'd love to have. To me, that's health, right? Participating or arguing for a particular nuance, particular aspect of that nuance, to me seems too linear for me to understand.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. This has been so informative. I cannot wait to share this episode with everyone. If people want to find out more about you and get a copy of your book, what's the best place to find you?
Wonderful. This has been fun for me. So I'm glad I'm glad that's the case. Yeah, we're everywhere. We have so many different touch points in all of this, but to be very simple and clear, if you go to our website, wildtimshel.com, wildtimshel.com, you can buy the book, you can learn about us, you'll find us on Instagram. Everything is housed there. That's a hub of social activity.
And we'll go ahead and post to that in the show notes as well.
Wonderful.
So people can find you.
Wonderful.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Daniel. I can't wait to check out the book and follow along and see what other projects you start working on. So thank you again.
Absolutely. Thank you, Erica. It's a blessing.
Thank you.